Thank you very much for joining us. I know we're all getting excited, not only about this discussion, but about lunch that is coming very soon as well. I'm hungry also. And we have had, unfortunately, at the last minute, a dropout, Ural, from the Turkish FA. His plane didn't take off, sadly. So he's asked me to pass on a message, which I'll try and read for you. So this is Ural Akuzum from the Turkish Football Association, who was due to be on stage alongside us here this morning. He said, due to an unexpected logistical disruption, I was unable to attend the summit at the last moment. The Turkish Football Federation has a strong emphasis on the development of women's football. Turkey's reforms and institutional efforts in this field represent an open invitation for collaboration with all federations and stakeholders across the Arab and wider Muslim world. We firmly believe that the advancement of women's football is essential for both of the future of the sport and the progress of modern societies. It would have been an honor to be here today, and I extend my warmest regards and respect to each of you. So that's a message from Ural Akuzum, the executive board member of the Turkish Football Federation, and he is actually responsible for women's football in Turkey. So sorry not to have him here. Right, who is here is Eileen Gleeson from the Irish Football Association, and Farkhunda Muhtaj from, well, a former player, the most important thing. You've actually been on the grass, you've done it, you've been there, so it's going to be very interesting to get your insight in particular. But before we do all of that, I'll come to you first, Eileen. What is the lie of the land at the moment, in your opinion, in terms of women's football? Where does it stand today?
Well, hello everybody. It's very nice to be here and join in a panel discussion. I think right now women's football is in a very exciting position. It's witnessing exponential growth across multiple areas. So we see a really strong movement across investment, private equity investment, multi-ownership, global professionalization of the game, new competition formats, the introduction of sevens, the AFCON Women's Champions League, and I think it's all, connected to the increased visibility and the recognition that women's football is its own product. It's very different to the men's game and needs to be treated like that. And we're seeing then the explosion of fandom along with that commercial and visible increase.
And what about you, Farkhunda? You've obviously played in a number of different countries. First of all, which of those countries have you seen that's really progressive and really ahead of the curve? Which ones are behind the curve? What have you seen with your own eyes, having actually played the game in those various countries?
Yeah, it's interesting because as an Afghan Canadian growing up in Canada, we actually didn't have a domestic league until this year. And so,
no domestic league at all?
No.
Until 2025?
No professional
Wow.
women's football domestic league in Canada, which is quite shocking. It was always semi-professional. And so players like myself, when we graduated as varsity student athletes from university in Canada, we had two options. It was quit football or go abroad to Europe to continue your career. And I took the second option, of course, to go off to Europe and play. And I was lucky enough to live in a few countries and experience that, from Portugal to Turkey to the Netherlands, and now competing in Canada's first ever professional women's football league, the Northern Super League. But if I were just to compare some of the similarities or differences between Canada and Europe, I'd say Canada, considering it's the first ever professional women's football league, I believe they're doing everything correctly right from the beginning. So they've invested heavily in broadcasting deals and storytelling and social media presence and visibility, and that has translated very positively for our country and nation. To give an example, the Damallsvenskan, which is the Swedish league, very well established, the professional women's first division there. They've been operating for almost 37 years, and this year they had their record revenue of 18 million euros.
80 million.
18
million, okay.
Yeah. Canada's first ever professional women's football league. In our first year, our revenue was 30 million Canadian dollars.
Wow, 30 million Canadian dollars.
Exactly, in the first year ever, and that almost matches up or even exceeds Damallsvenskan for 37 years of operating. And so you can see that Canada is taking it seriously, investing right from the beginning, and they know visibility is the most important factor that's going to drive fan engagement and increase, the success of this league. Now, one thing that I'd say Europe has definitely done very well, which Canada is lacking, is having a clear player pathway and then also having an academy system that actually allows youth players to develop and also know that they can one day play in the top division or for their professional team. Unfortunately, in Canada, we don't have that as of yet, but hopefully that's something that continues to grow with the development of this league.
And do you think that money that you were talking about will remove the cliff edge? You were talking before about when you finished varsity, it was semi-pro or you leave. Do you think that'll remove the cliff edge, having that injection of money into the league?
I definitely think so. I mean, now Canadians that graduate from university, they have a tangible career path at home, and a lot of Canadians are not willing to go abroad, even as glamorous or amazing as the experience might be. And so now with this player pathway, now with the investments coming in, and also the Canadian League, I feel, is very, although not established yet because it was the first year, and in order to be sustainable and be able to replicate the success of the first year, you have to continue to make sure that you're doing the right things every single day. But the minimum salary is $50,000, which I know that's not a significant amount by any means. The average salary is $75,000, but in women's football, that's a considerable amount. When I started off my career in Europe, I got paid very, very, very little, and the only reason that I played was because of my passion for the game and how much I really wanted to pursue this career path. But now Canadians or anyone else that comes from abroad to join this league, they know that they're going to be taken care of. They're going to be considered a full-time professional. They won't have to work a second, third, fourth job to be able to support themselves, which is what historically a lot of female footballers have done.
Did you have to do that? Did you have to work a second job or a third job?
I did a lot of consulting work, yes. When I was playing in Europe, specifically when I had started off, yes, I was doing a lot of global projects, humanitarian projects, sport projects, and that's something that had supported me because just with my football career, there was no way on earth that I would have been able to make ends meet. When I went off to Holland, I did have a good salary, and it was very professional, the setting, the resources, the atmosphere. But I chose to continue because personally I want to use sport and football as a force for good. And so I believe my platform as a footballer doesn't end on the pitch, and outside of the game I want to be involved. And so I continue to do so. And even today, I am the community ambassador and footballer for Calgary Wild FC, which puts me in a unique position where I get to impact both on and off the pitch.
You're at the top of the tree, Eileen. You're the head of that administrative mountain, if you want to, for want of a phrase. Money is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean investment is critical, and I think now we're seeing the recognition of the impact of women's football, both economically, socially, and the investment is coming now, and we're seeing the benefits of that with the professionalization of the leagues.
Is it matching the ambition? The flow of money into the women's game, is it matching the ambition of scaling up the leagues, the squads, the clubs?
Yeah, I would say that varies across the world. I think we're seeing huge investment in countries like in US. We're seeing, new clubs and new franchises Boston, Denver, Atlanta paying 150 million plus dollars just to enter the league.
$150 million just to buy a franchise.
Yeah, and before you kick a ball, 400 million in to build your stadium, to build your squad. So they're really committing to, I know we use the term, return of investment, but it's kind of the flip in terms of investment of return, because it's that long-term view of what the return will be and the commitment to that. I think in other countries, the ambition is there, but it's not completely matched. Whether that's a capacity thing to have those resources, but yeah, it's probably not. You might want to win the Champions League, but you don't necessarily have the capacity or the resources, or you don't necessarily invest that. So yeah, you see that variance across the world.
So where do you put that money? It's the biggest dilemma for anyone that's handed a budget. Where would you put it? And I'll ask you the same question in a second, Farkhunda. Would you go with the traditional areas of the world, in particular, where the game is burgeoning, it's flourishing? Or do you go to the new territories, the new markets, and say, look, there's an opportunity here?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's relativity, what your starting position is, and you'll see NWSL, you see UK, they want to be the best league in the world. You see, the beginnings of football, like here in Saudi Arabia, and your starting point is different, so you professionalise the league, but it's the introduction of women's football. So for me, to make a decision on that, I think for sustainability, and for the growth of the game, and then to build, competitiveness across international football competitions, I would place the money in those developing areas. I think we're seeing exponential growth right across the game. In terms of what more can be achieved at the elite level, that's where, you're really fine-tuning. But to bring the base level up, and in terms of sustainability, then I would focus on the development areas and those emergent market. And we're seeing quite a few. We're seeing South America. We're seeing the African, Saudi Arabia, of course. And we're seeing accelerated growth here in 4 years, like a professional league, second tier, and some real commitment and a long-term view. We're seeing, the introduction of elite level international players, which helps drive the standards up. It helps the home-based players. It helps the talent development. But it's also super important for your national team that you pay real attention to your domestic league and your home-based players, and not become an international league as a thing in itself. So that's really critical. But I think here we're seeing a really strong approach to the development of the game. We see, I think, Al Nassr in their first ever AFCON Women's Champions League. So that's real progress, and I think that's needed in terms of sustainability to keep the game going.
So I'm going to use that example that Eileen's given of $400 million US. I'm going to put that in your lap, Farkhunda. You've gone through the levels. You've climbed that ladder as a professional player. Where would you allocate the money? Because obviously you have to think about the first team. You have to think about marketing. But you also have to think about grassroots. And I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Farkhunda, I'm guessing that you didn't have professional coaching at under 8s, or what else are we seeing in the men's game? Under 6, I think, in some places, isn't it? They're getting professional coaching.
Sorry, I am 6, so excuse me. I would definitely put those investments or funds towards developmental areas, and the reason being So
youth you're talking about in particular?
Sorry, not grassroots, but areas that don't have strong domestic leagues. And the reason being because as a Canadian, we didn't have a domestic league for a very long time. And what that meant was many of our players had to go abroad. And when you go abroad, usually as a international player, you are not necessarily given the best opportunities to grow because the domestic players are take precedence or are more important to the development of their player pool. And so understanding the impacts that Canadians like myself have felt, I would ensure that other nations have a stronger domestic league as well. I would look at areas or in Asia or Africa where there's so much talent, but it's overlooked quite a bit, and those players are either groomed or promised certain things to be able to get to the next level, but that often doesn't happen for them, and unfortunately it's just a lack of opportunity that doesn't enable them to achieve their dreams. And so I would invest in those areas, and I also feel like the funds would go a lot further than it would in somewhere like the NWSL at this point, where 400 mil will just get you two or three franchises just registering in the league, whereas 400 mil can establish a very well developed league in areas like that. And then also,
because you need the competition, don't you?
You definitely
you can't
need
play
the
against nobody.
competition. Yeah, I mean, you definitely need the competition, but then with that 400 mil, it would go a lot further in those areas. But I'd also invest in just expanding certain competitions. Like we saw the last Women's World Cup went from 24 teams to 32 teams. That's a great way to invest funds to be able to get more nations from around the world to compete. I mean, Haiti was there for the first time ever. There was a few countries that competed for the first time ever, and that's how you grow the game. On top of that, we saw the UEFA Women's Champions League expand as well, and so I put my funds into areas that don't have a domestic league, but also leagues and competitions that serve a variety of nations at the same time.
Well,
I think the point being made here is that's being reflected now in the development of those competitions. We see the addition of the Europa League competition in Europe. We see, as I said, the AFCON Champions League. We see now the new Sevens competition, so a diversity of the game. And we'll see the introduction of the FIFA Champions Cup, Club Cup, and in 2031 then the expanded FIFA Women's World Cup. So that's really reflective of the increase in participation, new regions coming into international competition as well as club competition. So there is real development. I think the investment you're talking about, Joe, that 400,000, that's coming from private equity, private investment into a singular league. From a federation or FIFA, UEFA perspective, that investment is critical then in terms of those growing nations to develop that competitiveness, because in all sports you will get the variance between the very top, the bottom and the middle, and in my view it's important to build that base upwards in the middle, that you can lower the gap between the very elite and the next layer, and that drives the competitiveness, then reduces the blowout scorelines, increases the viewership. People want to see closer games, more exciting games, increases your fandom. So it has all this collective effect then by that shared distribution of the funding then.
You are involved with a national federation, and you touched on so many tournaments, obviously the expansion of the Women's World Cup, etc. How important are those tournaments to driving the domestic game, and especially if they're on home soil? I think by any measure, the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand was considered a huge success.
Huge.
No matter which statistic that you pluck out, whether it was financial or viewership or attendance.
Yeah, and I think
how important is it to driving the domestic game?
It's huge. I mean, I think you've touched on a load of knock-on effects or the impact of hosting a global tournament, and we've seen it repeatedly, and we've seen the UK, and I mean, it was also helpful that they managed to win it, the Euros, and then back-to-back. So we've seen the most recent Euros in Switzerland. You talked about the impact of the hosting the World Cup on Australia, and what you see then is at least 30% growth in participation. I think UK something like 130% growth, again, connected to winning the tournament.
Have you personally seen a jump?
Yeah,
even those tournaments weren't held in Ireland.
Yes,
have you seen a jump?
The proximity, and even for us, just qualifying for the tournament, the legacy of that is that increased participation. But the hosting of the tournaments, then you've also got the increase, the improvement in your infrastructure. So whether that infrastructure was in place or whether it was improved through investment or it's new stadia, you've got that as a legacy piece. You've got the increased participation. You've got the social and economic revenue from hosting those tournaments. But I think with all that and your legacy piece, the key thing and the key learnings, I think, is that you need to prepare and plan for your legacy piece, because with the increased participation, you have to be ready. So do you have enough clubs to facilitate that? Do you have enough pitches? Do you have enough coaches? And that's your legacy piece starts way before you host a tournament, because you can be guaranteed that you will get that spike. But how do you sustain that spike then post hosting the global tournament? But
so what you're saying is that boost, that initial boost, is short-lived. You have to be able to capture as much.
It can be unless you plan, because if you get the spike in participation, but the young girls or the new players don't have anywhere to play, or no games programs or no coach, then you run the retention piece. Yeah, is gone. But I think that planning piece, and we see it time and time again with the hosting of a tournament. So it's hugely beneficial, and hugely beneficial to your original question around your domestic game. So you increase your participation, increase your infrastructure. It's definitely a positive.
Stay with us, Farkhunda. I don't want to lose you. We've already had a couple of dropouts before this panel started. I wanted to ask you, obviously being based in Canada and playing in Canada, do you think the next Women's World Cup, which is in Brazil, and I come at this from a broadcast angle, the time zone, do you think that'll have a huge benefit to football, not just in Canada, but in the States in particular, by being that side of the world?
What is the time zone difference between Brazil and...
I don't know. What is it?
I have no clue.
Well, what's the time difference between Toronto and Vancouver?
3 hours.
3 hours, right,
Yeah.
okay. So it'll be something similar, I'm guessing.
Something similar to that. I think it would be very beneficial, because we are used to having World Cups where we have to either wake up very early, or very early is often the case. Qatar was an example of that, but I think Canadians are so passionate that they will always wake up regardless of when the games are. The FIFA World Cup being in Brazil, obviously closer to us in proximity, so I would assume that there will be a lot of female football fans and male football fans as well traveling to that World Cup, which will be huge. But just to piggyback off of the legacy piece, because Canada actually hosted the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2015, and unfortunately I feel like we missed the legacy behind what that World Cup could have been and meant for our nation. It was a huge opportunity for us. We didn't have a domestic league for us to be able to introduce that sooner, but then 10 years later we got one. And that also wasn't because of the Canada Soccer Federation, but rather it was because of pro female footballers or Canadian national team legends that were now retired wanted to do something about the influx of female players either quitting or leaving the country. And so that was a result of those players stepping up, not as a result of the momentum that Canada Soccer had felt throughout that World Cup. And so back to what Eileen mentioned, legacy is about planning ahead of time, understanding that the impact of this World Cup, participation rates went up when the World Cup had happened. Girls' dreams and desires to achieve playing professional football had skyrocketed, but what did that mean when there was no opportunities at home? And so that's things that we have to consistently consider. Don't sell a dream to an individual if you don't have the resources there to be able to facilitate that.
So what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, they need to have a dual strategy. One is the tournament itself on that particular date in that particular year, and the other is, right, what are we doing as soon as the final whistle goes of the final game of the
Yeah,
tournament?
I wouldn't say a dual strategy. I would say a fully integrated strategy.
Right.
That it forms part of your planning and what's going to look like post, but it needs to be integral I would say, as opposed to a separate kind of.
And where would you say on the back of all of that, the growth opportunities are going to come? I'm going to try and get you to look ahead slightly, and no one knows what's going to happen next year in football, never mind 5 years from now. But for you, Eileen, where do you see the game 5 years from now, and where do you see the growth opportunities 5 years from now?
I think the biggest growth right now is the fan base and fandom. Visibility, obviously, a key driver in this. I think some of the biggest growth there is going to come through investment. I think a really burgeoning area now is research in women's football on just bespoke the women's game, the female athlete. I think that's going to drive what the game looks like, how we build our infrastructure, really profile what the women's fan base and who they are, and tend to the needs of that game. And I think that's going to drive the growth. I think in terms of the professionalisation of the game, you're going to see a lot more countries with the professional leagues over the next 5 years, fully professional. And I think one area that's growing now in terms of maybe integrated into that professionalisation is the transfer of players. We've seen some record-breaking fees for players at the higher end of the scale.
You think that's going to be a key revenue driver for potential investors who are on the outside looking in at the moment?
I don't know if it's going to be a revenue driver. I don't know if the revenue from those transfers is significant at the moment. I think we've seen these record-breaking fees. Whether that's sustainable or not, I'm not too sure. But I think that's more related to that the base is low, and that difference will level out. But yeah, I think that comes with the professionalisation of the game, the visibility of the game. I think we'll see increased prize money around the bigger competitions. We're seeing that now with the new Sevens competition and the 2 million prize fund. That's a private competition. But yeah, I mean, players and women's football has a lot of expectations and around equity. And that, I feel like, beyond the game then, that social impact, the cultural piece, we see it here in Saudi Arabia, the possibility of change is, through women's football is huge. So I think the future of the game is in a very positive state right now and going forward.
I want to ask you, and this is quite an interesting question, I want to ask you about the advantages or disadvantages of being tethered to the men's game. And what I mean by that is clubs in particular. So obviously you have Arsenal women, Chelsea, there's a whole number of big clubs, Barcelona, for example, that you could talk about. Do you think they lose a little bit of that identity? And I'll come to you first, Farkhunda, on this. Do you think they lose a little bit of identity by being tethered to this global machine? But at the same time, obviously, we have to think about resources, don't we?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of benefits. I've played for teams that have men's teams as well, a club that have both men and women, and then I've played for clubs that just have women's teams. And the benefit of having a club and a brand that has both men's and women's teams is you have top-notch resources and facilities, very professional landscape and atmosphere for sure, but also your fan base is shared. And so the players that support the men's team will often also be updated on the women's team and be able to support you in some capacity as well. And then also your success is almost shared and you feel that you can support one another, which is incredible. I think that's a huge benefit. For example, when I played in the Netherlands for Fortuna Sittard, we did a lot of common activities with the men's team as well. So we had opportunities where we would go out to the community and run camps or, visit young football clubs or whatever that might be. And so if the teams or the young kids weren't exposed to us but had their favorite male footballer playing on the men's team, well, now they became fans of us as a result as well. And so I think that has been very, very beneficial in that circumstance. Now, with the current club, for instance, that I'm playing for that only has a women's team, now every team in the Northern Super League is a brand new franchise and only has a women's team. And alternatively, we have the Canadian Premier League, which is the men's professional league in Canada, and they all only have men's teams. Now, the downside of it is, imagine in the same city you have a professional women's team and a professional men's team, but they don't collaborate really. They're not under the same brand or umbrella, and so you're almost competing for fans rather than having a cohesive effort to bring more, fans, engagement to the club. On top of that, you don't share resources. It's very competitive, to say the least. But the benefit that I do want to say is that when you have a women's only team, you get to dictate everything you want to do the way you want to do it. And so there's no discussion of, well, this is how we always do things and this is our protocol. You get to reinvent the wheel, which is great, or you get to see what has already existed and has been successful and replicate that. And so it's, dual the way you look at it. I prefer when it's both men and women under the same umbrella, but depends what you're looking for.
So, as far as Farkhunda is concerned, overall, it's an advantage, Eileen. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think context is everything. If you're in a club that, a shared club, men's and women's, that places a real value on the women's team and fully integrated, ample resources, that shared experience that Farkhunda spoke about, the secondary fan translation, like that's really important. It's very valuable. On the flip side, if you're in a club who doesn't place much value or doesn't give enough resources to the women's team, that's difficult. And then you've got both success and failure stories with female only clubs as well. You've got challenges both sides. So it really depends on the context of where you are, but both can be successful and both can face challenges.
And if you had a magic wand, and I'll come to you first, Eileen, if you had a magic wand and you could do one thing that would really accelerate the women's game, what would it be?
Oof.
Just one thing. Money, no object.
I would professionalise every domestic league in every country. And when I say professionalise, I mean infrastructure, including, coaching, refereeing, the whole ecosystem, the talent development pathway, and all of the resources that are needed to develop those, each country and every home-based player. Yeah.
Farkhunda? A magic wand?
Definitely echo everything Eileen mentioned, the professionalization of the game, but also accessibility to the game. I feel like specifically in North America, we're getting further and further away from who can access to the game because of how expensive the academy system is, which is pay-to-play system and model, which benefits the individuals that can afford it, but we all know that most of the talent comes from communities that
True.
are underserved, that have the passion for the game, that are playing on the streets, that didn't necessarily have access to structured sport. So accessibility to the game, and then also the professionalization of it.
So do you feel that in general some barriers are being removed one by one, but as you point out there's other barriers that are being put in place?
Yeah, the gap definitely
kind of an interesting
has strengthened.
dilemma, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think the more professional the game gets, the less accessible the game gets as well, which is quite tough because if you're at the top end of it, you want to make sure it continues to grow and the funds and investments are coming in so you can continue to professionalize the game. But then what that means is you're making it out of reach for many other families and individuals, whether it be ticketing sales, be accessing a game, becomes unaffordable. Competing and playing grassroots level and developing through the player pathway becomes inaccessible. And so how do we allocate funds and resources to ensure that the sustainability of the game? Because ultimately, if players can't afford to play the game, there will be no players to pave the pathway forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think I fully agree in terms of the foundation of any sport is participation and, you know, having access and opportunity to play. I think Farkhunda's mentioned US there and the pay-to-play model. I know they're probably keen to move away from that, and the removal of their draft system now completely changes the landscape of their youth development. So we hopefully will see a move away from that across the US continent. But like with every sport, participation, having as many play for as long as possible is key to the sustainability of the game. Your talent pool obviously comes from your wider net.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and but the game itself is for everybody, and your talent and your national team is, you know, you're coming to the peak there in terms of numbers, but having the opportunity to play is fundamental to everybody, which is, you know, such an inspirational movement, cultural, social here in Saudi Arabia, to have girls now have the opportunity to play, as well as see the accelerated development of the professionalisation or the move towards that. And lots of work to be done here and across the globe, but the fundamental
and in such a short space of time, what
Yeah.
they've done here as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a long-term project, but I think, you know, there's real commitment to developing those structures and that infrastructure, and the domestic league, which is key. And all of the research shows it. The successful nations pay close attention to development of their domestic league, which you know, makes sense if you join the dots, but doesn't always happen. But the fundamental base for every sport is participation and that opportunity to play. So removal of barriers such as pay to play is critical.
Okay. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you,
Considering we had two of our players pull out in the warm-up, I think they've done an absolute fabulous job on this discussion on the women's game. Thank you to Eileen Gleeson of the Irish Football Association and to Farkhunda Muhtaj, professional player with Calgary. Thank you to you both.